Rita McGrath.
Rita McGrath is one of the world's premier experts on leading innovation and growth during times of uncertainty.
So the shorthand description for what I do is I'm a professor at Columbia Business School, have been for a long time. But in other parts of my life, I advise companies, I write books and articles, I do research, and I work with organizations to try to help them really simplify and demystify this whole area of strategy, innovation, and digital transformation. That's what's kept me pretty busy for the last few years.
Have we made things as simple as possible? Einstein very famously said, things should be made as simple as possible, but no simpler. One of my favorite iconic leaders in this space is a woman named Sharon Price John. She is the CEO of Build-A-Bear Workshop. And she has this philosophy. When she came into this company, it was really in bad shape. It had been founded by an entrepreneurial genius, Maxine Clark. Those of you who know Build-A-Bear, you know its basic premise, right? You, as parents, you pay great money to provide the free labor that creates this woman's product. It's incredible. What a business model, right? But anyway, it kind of got to the stage where it had outgrown what Maxine could bring, and they really needed to bring in somebody with heavy-duty corporate chops. And what Sharon realized was Build-A-Bear at the time thought of itself as a workshop that was in malls that happened to have this brand. And she turned it on its head. She said, this is a brand that happens to have workshops in malls. And that led to a whole series of successive growth opportunities. But the first few years were rough. And she came into it with a very simple idea that you can borrow and take away tomorrow. She calls it SDSS times 2. Stop doing stupid stuff. That is the public term. She uses a more colorful one in private. And then once you've stopped doing stupid stuff, that should free up time so that you can start doing smart stuff. And to me, this is a beautiful example of simplification. And we've used the metaphor of murmuration a lot to illustrate this, which is, these birds have simple things that they're focusing on. They focus on like the 7 birds around them, and they don't get farther apart than this. And based on the environment that they're in, they can, without having to know the whole big picture or get a top-down directive, they can all move as one. And I think it's a nice metaphor for how we like to think of our organizations operating. Are we thoughtful and intentional about loose versus tight coupling? Now, that's a term from computer science. Tightly coupled situations are sometimes very useful, but they tend to be most useful in situations that do not change a lot. Because if you've got a tightly coupled system, an issue in one part of the system has a ripple effect on everything else. So if you think about electricity grids, they're sort of built with breakers. What are the breakers there for? In your home, you've got breakers, right? They make sure that a problem in one part of your system does not flow over and affect everything else. The trouble with a lot of large bureaucratic hierarchies is that we've forgotten this basic message. And so we tightly couple a lot of things. So before you can make a change to a website or shift, a bit of marketing material, you've now got to go to 15 different sister organizations whose work is somehow interdependent with yours. And it slows things down. It's a source of enormous frustration. Those of you who've been in, one or more meeting that you thought was a complete waste of time, you are experiencing the negative consequences of this. And I think an interesting way of looking at it is, how many people do you have to coordinate with? How many dependencies have you built in? Amazon is very famous for saying no team should be better than can be fed on 2 pizzas. And the reason why are these communication links. If you've got only 3 people you have to deal with, it's 3 links. If you've got 6 members, it's more links. And by the time you get up to 50 people, you somehow get brought to create consensus and bring into your world. It's an almost unmanageable 1,225 links. And so I think when you're thinking of organizational design, give a lot of thought to where are you creating dependencies. More dependencies can sometimes, as I said, be necessary if you've got a stable, relatively fluid, unfluid situation. By the time you add a lot of dynamism, those dependencies will come out and kill you. So give some thought to that. Do we take a stewardship perspective? Aidan already mentioned Fujifilm, which I love to contrast with Kodak. Fuji said, we are going to focus on capabilities, and we're not going to be afraid to reinvent ourselves. And you can see here, they started out as camera and film, they got into medical imaging, consumer skincare. personal medicines, all kinds of things. They have actually got formal task forces that did this. And Onishi Minoru, who you mentioned earlier, was one of the very first to realize the significance of the digital revolution. And his resolve crystallized into action actually back in 1984, when Sony developed the very first all-digital camera, the Mavica. And Onishi said, this is it, we're moving on digital now. 1984, I mean, that's a long time ago. But they started moving, again, this idea of moving before you have to. Another firm that I love, and this is a firm that's not driven purely for profit. This is a firm that's driven to provide great jobs and a great community to artisans out of Detroit. The company's called Shinola, and they make things that are suitable for the capabilities of people that used to work in the auto industry. So they make bicycles, and they make watches, and they make beautiful bags. I must have 3 of them. But what's interesting about it is they're a capability out kind of company. They're like, we'll go anywhere where our artisans can make stuff that's beautiful quality that people would like to buy, but we're not driven primarily for the maximum profit we can get. So I think it's interesting, to ask this question, have we really thought about the stewardship perspective? Are we thinking for the long term, or are we thinking of extracting value, for whatever shareholders we have? Research shows, and this is a tough one, this is tough. Research shows the more resilient companies in any given performance period tend to slightly underperform companies that are being managed more conventionally. Now, why is that? They're reserving some resources for resilience. They're operating conservatively with respect to the resources that they spend. So they are not maximizing every single dollar out of every single time frame. Over the longer term, they are, however, more resilient, and they tend to outperform. So it's a function really of where you're looking in terms of time frames, something our current version of capitalism really struggles with. Are we making room for emergence and self-organizing innovation? And you saw that at TOS, right? I can get resources to start a second YouTube channel. I can form a team that's going to decide they want to come into the office, whatever the Korean government says. I can do things that allow me to make decisions as close to the edges as possible. Have we built in trial and error processes and learning loops? Trial and error learning systems are almost always not linear, right? They're exponential. They have some kind of multiplicative curve that makes it very difficult for human beings to get our heads around. So you need help, right? So this one I think is a lovely example. This is Netflix. And what they have at Netflix, and I believe it's a product they use themselves, but they also offer it to other people, it's a thing called Chaos Monkey. And what Chaos Monkey does is it's freely let loose to hammer Netflix's code in unpredictable and unexpected ways. So what it does is it sees where the weaknesses are inside the firm before it's exposed to a customer. I think this is fascinating. They're deliberately creating a sort of a hack that's going to be negative to their own code so that they can fix it before it gets out into the world. That's the kind of thing we're talking about.